I'm coming to this conversation as an older person, and I'm also coming to this conversation as a person who's been writing and working and publishing for, more than a lifetime, really. And the aspect of caring is absolutely what's driven all of my books. I've written a lot of books over a long period of time, trained in psychotherapy, trained in ministry, trained in being a parent and in a grandparent. And I think that if there's one aspect that really unites all of that, it's caring. So I'm delighted to be having a conversation with you, actually.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be having a conversation with you. And I think this wonderful part of the Embolden Symposium that we come to, for the previous 2 days, we've talked about how we care better for and help empower older people. But this
Yes.
is the point where we're saying, well, what about us?
Yes.
How do we continue to do this incredibly important work that we do? And so I have 3 questions for you. And the first one really comes from my reading of your rather wonderful book called Your Name Is Not Anxious.
Yes.
And this incredible section, which was on soothing your body first. And what really impressed me about this was this sense that I have, and I know I share this with so many others, that there is a gap between the way we want the world to be and the way it is in relation to older people. There's a gap between the respect we want to see and the disrespect that we see. And sometimes it's hard to continue doing this work. It can be very emotionally upsetting to be an advocate in an ageist world or to be a caring person in an ageist world. And sometimes the responses are quite emotional, but I think so many of us try to think our way out of it. And what I got from your book was to soothe your body first. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I will talk about that. Look, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's the two ends of life where there's so little valuing of the care that the most vulnerable need. So if you think about people who are caring for very little ones, outside neonatal intensive care units or something, but people who are caring for very little ones and very older ones, very elderly ones, who are the most vulnerable members of our community, that caring is the least valued. And it's hard for carers not to take on some of that internally, even if they have, a whole lot of rhetoric against it, and not to absorb some of society's feelings that, this is work that if you had enough choices, you might not be doing. So dealing with it mentally only is not enough, because you will have argued with yourself and said, actually it's a vocation. I love this work. Or you will have told yourself, I'm doing this work because I see the need. Or it may be that you are doing this work because it is the option available to you. We can't discount that either. And those categories all matter very much. So when I talk about soothing the body first, what I'm suggesting there is notice which thoughts are causing you quite a lot of stress or inner conflict or distress. So stress, inner conflict, or distress. And distress comes out of disrespect, either for oneself or for the world around you, which very much applies here. Once you've noticed what the stressors are, you need also to know, and this is something I really learned in writing this book, Your Name Is Not Anxious. Once you know what the stressors are, you will be in a much better position to understand how they are affecting my body. Am I sleepless? Am I feeling very irritable? Am I feeling critical and frustrated and judging of others? Am I feeling enough is never enough? Am I feeling overburdened at the end of a day by what I have not done without giving myself credit for what has been done? Or am I rushing through the parts of the caring that I most enjoy, prioritizing parts of the caring that absolutely must be done. There are parts of caring that absolutely must be done. But if you're rushing by those parts of caring that actually connect you to yourself as well as to that other person, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So when you begin to notice that happening, you can also notice what is happening in your body, again, whether it's sleeplessness or headache, or you're finding it very hard to settle to something that's relaxing. And once you've identified that small series of steps, noticing and then auditing, as I call it, auditing what really matters here, what rewards me, what doesn't, you can begin to do something about it in order to soothe the body. Soothing the body is the great trick here. And we also need to learn, if we're caring for very elderly people who are often highly anxious or highly distressed or in a state of grief, really, that so much is lost to them. Some of this self-soothing that I emphasize so strongly in my book can also be part of the way that you talk to that person, so that it's not generalized cliches. It's not an assumption that things could be so much worse. It's just listening to what is being expressed right now, either physically or verbally, and saying, that must be really hard. How can we just be a little bit more gentle around this? For example, I give many, many examples, but in soothing somebody else's anxiety, you also soothe your own, because we are so interconnected in these sorts of conversations.
That's incredibly powerful and practical, Stephanie. I'll be thinking about that for weeks, I think, and
Good.
try putting some of those strategies in place.
Yes.
I think you partly answered my second question, but I want to ask you anyway. And it's
Yes.
really a question about numbness, and it's this idea that that for so many people we set the bar at a standard that is full citizenship or full respect or full humanness
Yes.
for older people, and then find that we work in a system that is devaluing of older people.
Yes.
And what I notice is that there's a kind of a numbness that
Yes.
settles in, a numbness to the disrespect.
Yes.
And how can we be more aware of that? Or how can we make sure that our values and the value of respect for older people doesn't get eroded by systems that don't always value?
Yes. All right. Well, the systems do not value. It's up to the human beings to be rebellious against systems that don't value every human being alive, frankly. So where you know that the system is in any way dehumanizing, a kind of rebelliousness is very, very healthy, even a bit of anger. Things should not be like that. How could things be different? But in the very personal encounter, what is enormously important is holding on to that Martin Buber idea that an encounter becomes sacred, an encounter becomes healing, even if it's only momentary, when I am with thou. I am not just carer with patient or carer with client or doctor with patient. When we are just our diagnosis, and that's why I called the book Your Name Is Not Anxious, when we begin to think of ourselves as our diagnosis, old person, geriatric or whatever it is, or, when people are in early stages of dementia, for example, and are very aware of the losses of cognition and how irritating it appears to be to other people. The minute we step away from that kind of self-identifying, of ourselves. We will stop identifying other people in a reductive way. And this needs daily consciousness. We need to get into a frame of mind where we notice, when I spoke to Amy this morning, I was really brusque. I was aware that I had 5 other people to give medications to in a ridiculously short amount of time. But did I just say, good to see you today, Amy? Good to see you today, Catherine. Good to see you today, Jared, or whoever it is. Not necessarily, how are you? But good to see you. That's a kind of blessing. And it means a lot to people. I don't know about you, Catherine, but I've had some very vulnerable times in the last few years with really serious illness myself, and also caring for my family on top of my professional life as a professional carer, as a psychotherapist and as a minister. And what I've noticed, and I've been in a number of different hospitals and, physical rehab and so on and so on, that just that moment of eye contact, or, at one point I had to have my heart stopped and started because I had SVT, which is tachycardia, in a very extreme way. And my cardiologist, who's quite a brusque person, came into the hospital where I actually was there for something else, and held my hand while my heart was stopped and started again. Just held my hand. He didn't have to. He's a senior consultant, could have sent a junior registrar or sent nobody, just sent the people who were doing the action. So let us value what we can give. Really, really let us be conscious that it's not a question of time, it's a question of quality of time.
Beautiful. I love the idea of the rebelliousness of
Oh yes,
of setting the value ourselves and hanging on to it.
absolutely, because society as a whole has got terrible values. Let's be frank. The values that our society holds generally are wrong. That doesn't matter how you made your money. If you're very rich, you're very important. That's not the case, actually. Each person is important, but not for how they've made their money. The quality of soul and heart is very, very important. So let's make eye contact. Let's have that just moment of, I'm pleased to see you, even with the grumpiest. And let us also interpret grumpiness and irritability and anger as anxiety. I make a very strong case for that in this book, that when people are highly anxious, and I think this applies to men at least as much as it does to women, they will be very defensive, sometimes far too straightforward, or they may be self-medicating in ways that we don't approve of or we know are not good for them. If you can reframe that and see it, that is their anxiety speaking. And if we can speak somehow to the part of themselves that still has, a greater interest in life, or greater integrity, or greater interest in knowing how things could be a little bit better, appeal to the best of them, not just feel irritated by the worst of them. And I know that when some of the people listening to this, they'll say, oh, it's all very well for Stephanie Dowrick, she's a blah, 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 blah. I know how hard it is. But when we lose that moment of I-thou connection, it erodes our power also.
There's a beautiful quote by Viktor Frankl. And he says that everything can be taken away from a person except the right to choose one's own attitude, I think is the word he uses. Yes. But that idea of values, that we can decide.
Yes.
I think, Stephanie, my invitation would be to people, to listening to your responses, to think about their values
Yes.
that they hold towards older people, and to check in on those as though it was a compass that you're just checking in and not letting that slip.
Checking in. I'll go back to the Frankl quote, though, because I'm a student of Viktor Frankl in a sense, because I've worked with his ideas all my adult life, and I quote Frankl very positively in my book. However, we can't always choose our attitude. When we are in a state of extreme distress, whether it's mental health issue, whether it's oncoming dementia, or sometimes when it's a physical illness that is really, or even let's face it, if we're facing homelessness or we're facing extreme poverty, choosing our attitude is not always easy. Frankl learnt this, of course, in the worst of circumstances because he was in concentration camps, but he was also a person of great inner strength, and he had a philosophical frame, and not everybody has this. And extreme anxiety, extreme depression, or a whole lot of other illnesses can diminish that capacity to feel that you have agency and are choosing. However, and it's a big however, the book is called Your Name Is Not Anxious, because when we're not in those extreme situations, we can disidentify, at least somewhat, from that overwhelming feeling, stand back and say, I am more than my old age. I am the sum of my ages, or I am more than a carer, but I can bring to my caring this, this, and this. Yeah.
Incredibly powerful. Yeah, that resonates very powerfully.
Good.
Stephanie, the last question I wanted to ask you was about, again, reflecting on an ageist world.
Yes.
Thinking about so many people that I know who are aged care advocates, who are aged care workers, who work with older people,
yes,
in paid or unpaid roles, and their work isn't valued.
Yes.
And what is a message that you could give to them? We have trouble recruiting and retaining people because they may not feel that they're going to be valued, and certainly it's the reality for a number of good people that I know, that they feel that they're not valued. And how do they keep doing the work? How do they continue in that context?
Well, we've covered some of that, Catherine. So what I would emphasize is coming back, first of all, to your motivation. And sometimes your motivation may have been necessity, that you don't have a choice. You, of the 4 siblings, are the one that has the very difficult parent, let's say, and you are the one who is caring, and you're not getting much back, and you're not getting much support either from the other siblings or whatever the family dynamic is. That's a very, very difficult situation. There may be people working professionally who are saying to themselves, gosh, I've done this for 15 years. Should I be taking better care of myself by moving into a better paid area of work? Or there may be somebody who's saying, I never wanted to do this work, but it's the only job I can get. So again, across that spectrum of who the carers may be. And I would say, coming back to your highest motivation and writing it down and speaking it almost like a mantra. I have respect for human beings at whatever age they are. I know there is a wisdom, even in the most difficult old person. They must have learned something from life. I'm going to find out what that is, or whatever it is. But I would also say that within the caring professions, particularly around old age, because little children can be very, very rewarding and cuddling and enchanting and so on. And sometimes older people, and remember, I'm older person too, but sometimes older people can be much more difficult to care for. Let's be real about that. So I would say that people in that sector, please let's not call it an industry. Isn't that disgusting? It's not an industry, it's a sector, it's a profession, it's a heart-led vocation. I think we all need group supervision, peer supervision, ideally, or with somebody, you know, like me or many other people could do it, coming in every now and then to refresh, so that people have an opportunity to speak really frankly about what they're finding very hard to bear, and really frankly about what their needs are. I would also say that anybody who's in a demanding, caring profession or role, if it's private care at home, needs to be fairly ruthless about taking time for themselves, doing something that really rewards. Otherwise, burnout doesn't begin to cover it. In all our lives, we need some joy. We need some reverie, time just to think. We need some time to dance, perhaps to sing, whatever it is, to be in nature. And if it's a family situation where you're not clocking on and clocking off, even more so. There are respite care situations. The person may never want to go. You have to take care of yourself, I would say. It's the old put your oxygen mask on. And I talk a surprising amount in this book. I write a surprising amount in this book about little rituals through the day, sitting down, tasting your cup of tea, eating a delicious biscuit, just enjoying a moment of sensual reward. But we need some times that are more than that also.
Stephanie, one of the projects I think I sent you some information on was a project that I worked on previously, and it was called Everyday Angels, celebrating the achievements of staff in aged care.
Yeah.
And it was such a beautiful project. And what we did with that project was we asked people in the community to send in a postcard telling us something, even a simple thing,
Yes,
that an aged care service provider did that they saw as important. And there are over 300 cards, and they were really beautiful, beautiful messages
yes,
from the community. But in one of the workshops, one of the aged care workers said, "Can I do one of these for myself?"
right.
And it opened this incredible, started an incredible process where that was called Everyday Angels, and we're referring to this as DIY Angels. And it's
Yes,
the idea: don't wait for the community or your boss or anybody else to tell you that your
yes,
work is valued. It's
yes,
about valuing it ourselves. And we found that if the Everyday Angels is like a big fairy floss sugar hit, wonderful, that this is like a low GI muesli bar. It just sits with us for a long time. And I've been practicing this myself, that we say,
yes,
what is it that I did today that I value?
yes. I think that's very, very important, Catherine, because that translates both into a workplace situation where people could very overtly cultivate a culture of appreciation. But what you're saying also goes to the person that I think perhaps especially concerned about, who's doing a lot of caring without a great deal of support. I'm very concerned about that person. I mean, the person who is in a workplace situation has got very, very real demands on them. I'm not minimizing that for a single second, but they also have colleagues. And if management are listening to our discussion here, then it's really, really important to ask themselves, do we have a culture of appreciation in our workplace? That is transformative. that is probably even almost as transformative as being well paid, which, is a real struggle. But appreciation and having little notes up about it. Some years ago, I went to Bhutan, which was marvelous. And we went to a school, and then there were lots and lots of, happiness in the land of happiness, Bhutan. And it's a very devout Buddhist country. And there was a sign on one of the walls said, if you need a smile, I'll give you one of mine. It was just so lovely. And you can't look at that and not smile. So it's also how we articulate these things and not just think once is enough. Once is not enough. Appreciation needs to be fairly specific and frequent. We all need it. It's a rescue remedy for the soul. Catherine, you might want to mention to people that I have a website, Stephanie Dowrick, DOWRICK, one word, stephaniedowrick.com. And on that, I have a lot of resources for around anxiety, but I also have a lot of spiritual talks that I've given at different times, guided meditations and so on. So there's a lot of resource there for people who want that. So I can't recommend that enough because it's also free. And then if people want to know more about workshops or whatever, they can just put their name in on the mailing list and join that way.